Hi guys, we're now going to continue with looking at networking. And in this lesson, I'm going to talk about routers and switches. So routers especially are things that you will interact with in the cloud. So it's important to understand what they're used for. So let's start with a look at a basic network. So in this example, this could be a company, and the company's got several computers, and they connect those computers to a switch. Now, I'm just letting you know what a switch is, for the purposes of just understanding this basic architecture. But in the cloud, you won't have to worry about switches. You won't actually worry about plugging anything in. It's all done for you. But essentially, a switch is the device into which a computer will connect its network card. So each of these computers has a network interface card with a cable. The cable goes into a switch. If this computer wants to send data to this computer, it's just going to send it to the switch, and the switch knows to forward it out a different port and go to this computer. Now, you might have multiple sets of computers. So maybe, for example, this is a different building in your office, and you've got another switch and another set of computers. Now, how can you make these computers talk to each other? Well, one way is you can connect the switches, and then it all just becomes one big network. However, in some examples, you'll have different IP address blocks. So in IP subnet A on the left here, we have the address block 192.168.0.0/24. And therefore, these computers pick up the addresses 192.168.0.1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Now on the right here, we have a different subnet. So we've given these different addresses. In this example, they're using the 10.0.0.0/24 network. So they have different IP addresses. Now, you can't send data from a computer using one IP address range to a computer in another IP address range just using a switch. We have to introduce something else, and that's called a router. And a router is what is able to find the correct destination for that IP address. So if computer 10.0.0.1 wants to connect to 192.168.0.1, it will send some data to the router, and it's going to say to the router, do you know where this address range is? Because I need to find this computer. And the router has something called a route table. And this is a very simple scenario. So in this case, the router has two interfaces, Ethernet 0 and Ethernet 1, and it knows where networks are in relation to those interfaces. So when the data comes from this computer, it says, well, you're trying to find the 192.168.0.0 network. I know that's our Ethernet 0, so I'm just going to forward your data that way, and it will make it to the destination. Now, obviously, in networks, you'll often have lots of interfaces and lots of networks, and routers connected to other routers and so on. So it gets a lot more complicated, but that's a basic way that a router works. So remember that when you're operating at what we call layer 3 of the OSI model, so that's the Open Systems Interconnect model. You can look that up to understand a bit more detail if you like. At layer 3, we're talking about IP addresses, and we need a router to be able to forward that data.